Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Brennan. I'm a tax partner in KPMG. On behalf of KPMG and Airline Economics, I'm delighted to welcome Vinodh Srinivasan, co-head of Structured Credit Group in Mizuho. Vinodh, you're very welcome to our discussion this afternoon. I'll start it off by just asking, what is your assessment of lessor performance and how does it vary geographically?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me. I appreciate KPMG and Airline Economics organizing this. In terms of the lessor performances, I think they've been really good over the last 12 to 18 months. We've seen pretty much all the lessors really produce very good results. And that's partly been driven by the rate environment where lease rates are going up.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, spreads have actually come down. So a lot of them have been refinancing or financing their debt at very low yields.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
think about the leasing game, right? It's a cost of money versus
Correct.
where you put
Yeah.
it out. And so the math's been working.
Yeah. And do you have concerns about the general economic environment and the operation challenges lessors are facing at the moment?
Well, I guess that leads to the OEM question, right? Because the biggest operational challenge is really the supply chain and the delivery of new aircraft. What you're seeing with a lot of the lessors, so if you just take a big step back, right? You've got the order book lessors. They typically sell the planes when they're, call it 7, 8 years old, to either midlife lessors or to the financial markets through the ABS notes.
Yes. Yep.
I feel like they've been holding on to the planes a little longer, driven by 2 points. One is the older assets are yielding better returns, right?
Because so the supply chain
it's
issues.
Revenues, right? And the supply is not there because the deliveries have been so slow on the front end.
Yeah.
So I think what you're seeing is like the average age that the order book lessors are holding their assets are getting a little longer. There's still a fair amount of trading that's happening, but it's mostly been trade sales that are going to midlife lessors.
Yeah.
Haven't really sold anything to financial investors in any size as yet.
As of yet, yeah. And how concerned would you be with these OEM challenges at the moment?
Well, I mean, that's a question I can only speculate about, but it feels to me like this is going to be a problem for a long time. I think people 2-3 years ago talked about, like after COVID, that in 5 years everything will get resolved and you'll be back to production levels that were similar to pre-COVID. I think that's a much longer window now. I think it's could be 7, 8, 10 years. I think it's just going to take time. So I think the supply side is going to be anemic for a period.
Yep.
And so the biggest result of that is that your older assets are going to last longer.
Correct.
Which has never been an issue. I think they're well maintained. They fly well, and I think you're just going to get used to older planes that we're all flying on.
Yep. Well, with I suppose the benefit for lessors that lease rate factors will remain strong.
Well, given where U.S. interest rates are, hopefully that will continue, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they've gone up obviously since the rate hikes, and it takes a while for the lease rates to adjust, and so I think we're seeing that right now, and it should continue.
Yeah, and do you feel, you touched on the interest rate environment there, do you feel we're in a more settled interest rate environment at the moment, or do you think we'll see further changes?
So I think the volatility is somewhat muted, right? We obviously 2022 was crazy when the rates hiked up so much. We're seeing them ease back down, and now your fluctuations are within 50 basis points. So I mean, the 5-year was as low as 350 not that long ago, and then over the last 2 weeks it's gone back up to 4% roughly. Okay. Yeah. But it's kind of that range, and I think it's much more stable than it was going back a couple of years.
Yeah, and what impact does the interest rate outlook kind of have on your business plan in Mizuho?
So we've been putting out a lot of balance sheet in terms of lending and supporting our client base, which has largely been lessors. We do lend to a few airlines, but it's been a small piece of the business. So over the course of 21, 22, 23, when the capital markets were not really conducive for issuance, We've just been extending warehouses and facilities and lending more capital to our lessor client base. That is all getting refinanced this year because both on the unsecured market and the ABS market, there's been a ton of issuance.
Yeah.
And so then I think we'll start reloading again by lending more.
Yeah.
So I think I would say Mizuho, but also the general banking community has been very supportive of the client base.
Yeah. And how accessible is the unsecured bond market for lessors and airlines?
Oh, they've been doing fantastic. I mean, all the large lessors have been issuing unsecured debt this year. Spreads have come in. We would argue that spreads are probably at an all-time low.
Yeah.
And some of them have been able to issue, preferred like convertibles as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Like Air Lease did one, and AirCap did one right before that. There were converts, and the Air Lease one was at 6%. And then the senior debt that the larger order book lessors have been accessing, the investment grade guys have been like in the 450 to 480 range, somewhere there. And then even the high yield
Very low
stuff
spreads,
is like sub 6%.
Yeah.
So it's all good.
Very attractive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so how important is the IG status for lessors?
It is important. It's very important because it is the deepest capital market in the world, the US IG bond market. And it's something that allows them to tap that source of capital on a periodic basis without much disruptions. It's a differentiator, especially when you think about the margins involved.
Yeah.
And so even 50 to 75 bips makes a difference based on where the lease rates are versus your cost of financing. So it is important that the larger lessors maintain investment grade, or the other ones that are growing to get to that stage get there.
Yeah, and that's a good segue to my next question. Like, how difficult is it to obtain IG status and actually to maintain that?
We do find most companies that get to investment grade keep investment grade status. Yeah. But it is history. It's operating history, right? You need to have time that you've been functioning as an organization. You need to have size and scale. Which becomes a very defining factor. Age of the aircraft matters. The type of aircraft, the length of leases matter. But I would say the two most important things are probably operating history in terms of years, as well as size and scale.
Yeah. And obviously when you're in an environment where you've got supply chain issues, it can be very difficult to scale.
This is true.
Yeah, that's challenging. You can see some of them facing. Very good. And in terms of the banking market, like how healthy is the traditional banking market, aviation banking market at the moment?
I think it's very healthy. I think you've had a bit of turnover with some lenders exiting and others coming in. We had over the last call it 12 months, Standard Chartered exit the aircraft lending business, although I'm hearing they're starting it up again. We've also seen NordLB put up their entire book for sale. So I think with regards to some of the European banks, I think with the ESG concerns and the government regulations around it, you're seeing some of them either curtail their lending or focus on new tech aircraft. But at the same time, you've got Japanese banks, you've got other US regional banks that have actually been stepping up a lot to fill that gap. So I would say the overall quantum of bank debt that's going out to the client community is very strong. Even now.
Very good. And what products do you see being availed of most in the market?
Well, if we focus on the lessors, right? I mean, the bulk of the capital they raise, if they're investment grade, is going to be the unsecured bonds, right? And then you've got midlife lessors that will typically or even the investment grade lessors, when they have joint ventures with third-party equity sources, they would avail of a warehouse facility to build up a portfolio and then refinance it in the ABS market. Airlines obviously access the unsecured market as well as the WTC market. So I think those are the primary capital market products. You do see unsecured issuances in, call it, regional markets like in Japan or in the Sukuk market or euro denominated, but those tend to be much smaller in size than the bulk of the capital that the lessors.
There's less available, And then are we seeing any interesting geographic trends in terms of who's leaving or entering the banking market?
Well, I think I kind of answered that earlier, right, with regards to the European banks sometimes focusing on new tech aircraft, and then and a couple of them have sort of exited the business. But what you're seeing more of is probably a real strong bid from the alternative lenders as a supplement to the bank debt.
Yeah.
I think the banking community, as I said earlier, has been quite supportive of the sector.
Yeah, yeah. And what are your thoughts on the alternative lending market? Something niche, or is it an area that's expected to grow?
I think, over the last 2.5 years, a lot of aircraft lessor talent has focused on lending versus leasing aircraft, right, as a different source of capital provision. I think it's there to stay. I think it'll be a piece of the puzzle. I'm not sure how big a piece of the puzzle it's going to be, because one of the benefits that the alternative lenders have provided the lessors in terms of being able to finance non-recourse portfolios of aircraft has somewhat been driven by the fact that the ABS markets, the math in order to issue ABS debt with leverage that made sense was complicated during 22 and 23. So a lot of these, primarily because the lease rates were still adjusting up, so they were too low, and the cost of debt had gone up. And the lessors the alternative lenders played a very important role in filling that gap. I don't know how big that piece will be when the math works for financing non-recourse portfolios in the ABS market. You're already seeing a fair bit this year. I think we're at something like over $6 billion of issuance in terms of aviation ABS. I think that takes some away from the alternative lenders. However, I do think they have a role to play. We view them as a partner. We don't view them as a competitor at all. And I think they will have a role to play, for the foreseeable future, especially with the supply chain issues we're seeing.
Yeah. And it's a good segue into the next question on the ABS market. I suppose, how important a role does it play in aviation finance?
I think it's a really important role, because I think when we talked about the order book lessors actually being able to sell assets to midlife lessors or to the financial markets, financial investors, in both cases, the non-recourse financing that they get is the ABS financing. It tends to be fairly high leverage. It tends to be slower amortization, and had priced very competitively between the window between 2012 and call it COVID. Right? 21 was a year where rates were unbelievably low. I don't think we see that again. But if you look at the math, between 2012 and 20, we were around 4.5% yield for 85% LTV. And we're at 5.5% yield for 80 now. So not that far off. But it's a real important financing tool that allows the midlife lessor to buy the assets, or for a financial investor to buy the assets. And as you know, aircraft trading is a very important component of lessor profitability.
Correct. Yeah. And I suppose, going forward, do you see a return of the E-notes in the ABS transactions?
Yeah, I do, because I think the investors that the U.S. financial investor community, which is probably the largest in the world, right, raised a ton of capital during that low interest rate environment after COVID, or during COVID, after COVID. That money has been deployed towards senior debt, because that was yielding a lot. But those spreads and rates have come down. And so they're starting to go down the capital structure looking for yield. And aviation still, if you just take a big step back and think about the macroeconomics, we're at the start of an upcycle, right? And given the supply issues, demand is very strong, and the supply is not there. So those elements argue that there should be sufficient cash at the bottom of the waterfall. The issue is that the lease rates hadn't adjusted yet.
Correct.
And the interest rates had gone up.
So high.
And so there was a funding gap, which was why there was an issuance. But now the rates have come down, the spreads have tightened, and lease rates are starting to go up. And so, like I said, I think the capital exists to buy E-notes or equity on portfolios of assets. It definitely exists right now. It's whether we can get the leverage to work so that the cash is there for the equity.
For the
And I think
basically,
we're starting to see that come. With hopefully with no geopolitical issues or no other blips in the horizon. I would think the natural progression is that you'll start seeing more and more ABS debt issuances, which will then lead to notes over the course of the next few months.
Few months been traded, yeah. And I suppose in terms of other structured debt products, what other ones are proving attractive for lessors and airlines outside of ABS or warehouse, what we've covered?
I'm not really sure. There's multiple. I mean, there was a few bespoke transactions that were done in 21, 22 that were. People call it a lessor WTC, or they call it a single credit financing with the lessor to help in case the airline defaults.
Yeah.
But those were few and far between.
Yeah.
That is still something that I think, if you had a high concentration of a single credit, that could be used. But those are typically done as a private placement or in loan format, because the airlines typically don't want that product cannibalizing their own WTC program.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't even know that lessor WTC is the right way to describe it.
Yeah.
But that's the only other one other than the alternative lenders, right? Because I mean, you could think of them providing a structured product, because to be honest, they provide non-recourse financing to portfolios of aircraft at with fairly large balloons from an amortization standpoint.
Yeah, and I suppose how attractive would, say, Middle Eastern products like Sharia compliant products be for lessors? Or?
I think they're very attractive. I think they are definitely a source of capital that should be tapped. I think the complication is that it's still a nascent market for aviation. There's only been two or three issuers that have issued the unsecured sukuk market.
Yes.
They also have a preference for weightings towards Middle Eastern carriers.
Yeah.
Which again, from a diversification standpoint, doesn't really work.
It's, very hard for a lessor, because the lessor, they're so geographically based.
Right, which is so. I think it's I think people have been selectively pursuing that market as well.
Yeah. And in terms of ESG in that, are environmental concerns having a material impact on the ability to raise debt or price debt in the market?
We've not seen a significant impact in the U.S. capital markets, although Aviation Capital Group just did a deal where it was ESG compliant and did very well. They managed to upsize it and price it well. But the pricing differential between sort of, call it ESG compliant versus not, has not been as large as perhaps it should be in the U.S. markets. I think it's more of a benefit in the European markets.
Yeah. And do you see it having an impact in the near term or longer term for, in terms of pricing of debt or the ability of lessors to raise debt in the market?
It's difficult sitting in my seat in the U.S. to see that it's something that is coming soon. I think if I'm more pragmatic about it, I think you would assume that it becomes a factor going forward, right? But it hasn't had that impact here, and it's actually night and day between how Europe behaves and the U.S. Markets behave with regards to ESG.
Yeah. Excellent. And finally, I suppose, looking out over the next 12 months, what are your optimism levels like?
Oh, I'm generally a glass half full guy, so I'm usually pretty optimistic. Definitely feel optimistic given that we've been able to lead, 3 of the 5 or 6 aircraft ABS deals that came out recently.
Excellent.
We're seeing more in the pipeline, so we've added sort of the lending tool to our armory, and so to speak, and so I feel pretty optimistic about the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, excellent. Very good. That's all. Thank you very much, Vinodh.
Thank you.